Hello to everyone and welcome to Old Women Who Write. I'm really pleased this morning and scared to death, I have to tell you. This is, Karen, this is like my first poet. I feel like I'm a virgin, which isn't easy to do. Today I'm going to be interviewing Karen Paul Holmes. Karen and I met at a writers' conference in Blue Ridge, Georgia. I'll have to tell you the longer story of why I even went to that conference some other time. But when I saw there was a poetry workshop, I decided to do that and go to it. And Karen taught this workshop and made the poetry so accessible. She was focusing on words, specific words that have impact. And I was really alerted to the possibilities of poetry, which I had just dismissed completely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And let me tell you a little bit about Karen. She has two poetry books. The most recent, is No Such Thing as Distance, published in 2018. She had one published in 2014 called Untying the Knot. Her poems have been featured on the Writer's Almanac. And for those who don't know what the Writer's Almanac is, that's Garrison Keillor, right? Yay. I'm so impressed. Also, the Slowdown and Verse Daily. Her publications include Diode, Plume, Valparaiso Review, and Prairie Schooner. Karen was the 2022 Tweet Speak Poetry Poet Laura. I love that name, the Poet Laura. And a finalist for the Lascaux, is that how you say that? Lascaux Review Poetry Prize. After a long career in corporate America, I can't imagine, including her last position as VP Marketing Communications at ING, which is now called Voya, she became a freelance writer who teaches writing workshops at various venues and conferences. Well, that's damn impressive. Hi.
Thank you. I'm
Yeah,
happy to be here.
I,
I
I'm
shouldn't be nervous because, we're all just writers trying to write.
I know you're right, but poetry has always been such a mystery to me. It is unfathomable, and I think I had some just unfortunate early exposures to poetry that I think was so dense that, at
Yes.
least in my younger, unformed mind, I didn't know what in the world the poet was talking about.
I
So I
know
just
that
sort of
happens.
dismissed it. Yeah. Yeah. And recently, I just have this feeling, and I wanted to check with you about it. The forms of poetry seem to have changed, grown, matured, gotten more diverse. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I would say that's a good quick explanation. There are still formalists who keep to the rhyme schemes and the meter, and sonnets are pretty popular right now. I think the 14 lines of a sonnet just makes them seem more readable because they're short.
Yeah.
But also there are people who love those formal and sticking to the rules. Um, but you know how an artist like Picasso, they had to learn the rules first. And Picasso, actually, I've seen early drawings where he drew very realistically, and
Yes.
then he started breaking the rules. So it's kind of like you need that understanding, and you need to know how sound plays such an important role in a poem. Whether there's rhymes on the end of every line, and that's not the way that I write, but usually there are sounds, rhymes, and other sounds within the poem, and paying attention to the rhythms, whether it's a formal meter or not.
Yes.
So basically, free verse has become very popular and it is more accessible, and that's what I write. But it doesn't mean you're totally free. Otherwise, it would just be prose. You still
Right.
need to have some, poetry craft techniques with sound and rhythm and metaphor and just all kinds of kind of
Right.
stuff.
I just finished reading No Such Thing as Distance, and I loved it. I really loved it. There were so many poems in there that spoke to me directly, I believe. For those who are watching this, I want to say this is a first for me. We're going to be reading some of Karen's poems throughout this. And we can just maybe scatter them throughout and talk about each as we do. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I want to tell you one thing before we did. I've spent the last 2 years writing a memoir.
Mhm.
And what I found, despite my feelings about poetry, was that every time something I was writing got like too close to the bone for me to write, I could write it in free verse,
Mm,
where I could not write it otherwise.
yeah.
And that was a startling revelation for one who doesn't like poetry or didn't know poetry.
Yeah.
I was very shocked at myself. And
Yeah.
of course, I started playing with it, and it's a lot of fun. A lot of
Mhm.
So, can we jump right in and read? Who wants to go first? You or me? What do you think? It's your book.
Whatever you want. I'm excited to hear you read. It's fun for a poet to hear someone else
Is
read
it?
their work.
Is it?
See
Or
what you would choose to read.
poems can be, I suppose, I'm sure it's true with all books. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, but poems can be so different read on the paper where it's flat. And
Yeah.
then hearing it read or reading it out loud can be very different, two different experiences. Okay, I will read this poem, which is called What Will You Do, God, When I Die? Talk to me. I've had a lot of death around, well, I'm 81, I've had a lot of death around me recently. And whenever that happens, of course, all of your inner rhythms are disturbed and you start pondering your own mortality.
Mhm.
So this one particularly spoke to me. You have it's not a subtitle, a line saying, after a line by Rilke.
Mhm.
Okay. Will you become me and I you as I leave this body, the only home I remember? Will rejoining be serenity, even more than I feel lying drowsy in my love's embrace? I believe you are the light that passes through every body, the space occupying each atom, water permeating the sponge of all flesh, all matter. They say I am that, but in this human beingness have forgotten. Will you give me a white tassel, light as breath for passing all my lifetimes? Or send me back to trudge again through the thousand lessons I failed? This time, I think I learned to love the right way, to find you in my core. I have felt sorrow's blade carving a place for grace to fill. Am I ready to rise with this mist lifting from the river in morning's silver?
Thank you. That was a delight. Beautiful reading. Thank you.
It greatly spoke to me, as I ponder where am I in my, not this life's journey, but all life's journeys, all of whatever happens before I arrived here and after I leave here. It spoke to growth, it spoke to perception, it spoke to love, it spoke to who are we? Who
Mhm.
am I?
Right.
Everybody's question, I think, who am I? What had you write that poem?
Well, I was actually at a workshop in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico,
Hmm.
and we met with various famous poets throughout the week. But that was, I think, the first night we had a reception, and the person who organized it, who's also a writer, threw out this line by Rilke that is, "What will you do, God, if I die or when I die?" And she said, okay, that's your prompt. You've got 10 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever it was, to just start writing. And, sometimes you draw a complete blank when that happens in a workshop. And other times, you really do start scribbling it. I love it because everyone in the room is scribbling and there's this sort of, group creative energy going on. So that poem, it really came out of me pretty quickly. And usually I edit a million times. probably kill poems sometimes with too much editing. But that one, didn't take a lot of editing, and I think maybe it's partly that subject matter that, it again, like you said, that would be really hard to write in a memoir. But in a poem, you can express these. And, talking about God is, too sentimental or too like overly religious or preachy or whatever. And so I don't know, I think that subject matter lended itself to a stream of consciousness kind of a thing
Yes,
where it came out.
exactly. And I have to tell you, I loved your use of the phrase white tassel, which
Um,
I'm assuming is the graduation tassel that you're
yeah.
hoping you have graduated for passing all of your lifetimes. Yeah.
I like to throw a little humor into a serious poem when I can. It just,
Yeah.
I mean, life has humor and seriousness in it. So why
Indeed.
not sort of
Indeed
try
it
to
does.
combine it?
I love hearing the story of how you wrote it. I have found the same thing in writing classes, writing to prompts. My brain says, I hate doing this. I'm not going to have anything to write. And sometimes I don't have anything to write. But most of the time, particularly if there's a timer on it, you have 10
Yeah,
minutes to write or whatever, you start scribbling, and I think your right brain just takes over. And you are
exactly.
just writing stuff you didn't know was there. And that's
Yeah,
really exciting thing.
it is. Yeah, it feels great.
Try to do some of that, have tried to do some of that on the Old Women Who Write Facebook group. But I think what happens when it's in a group like that is people write and then edit, and edit
Mhm.
because it's going to be published in print on this, on the screen. And so it
Correct.
isn't as, like that as prompt
Yeah.
writing should be. So,
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
would you like to read a poem?
Sure. So I thought I would read a poem that's well, so this is the cover of the book that we're talking about, No Such Thing as Distance. And there are a lot of poems in here. Well, it's autobiographical mostly. It is kind of a memoir in poetry. But I like writing poems because it's like one piece of a story at a time rather than sitting down and going, okay, I'm going to write this whole memoir. And
Right,
where do I begin?
right.
So this is a little bit more whimsical. A lot of mine are very much story poems, but this one is a little more whimsical. And I have this epigraph to my mother and to myself because both my mother and me love taking pictures of sunsets. And it's like no matter how many you have on your phone, you keep, oh, another sunset. I've got to take a picture of it. So it's called The Woman Who Can't Stop Taking Photos of Sunsets. Beauty hurts and feels good at the same time. She can't get enough. Knockout roses give her a 1-2 punch. Mountains slay her. The ballet stabs. She cries when sinewy runners cross the finish line or a bride glides toward a groom. At 16, when Brahms spilled from Interlocken's stage, she tried to swallow the music, to hold the cello's crescendos inside her gut. Her summer self still hangs in the branches of those Michigan pines. She slept with Catcher in the Rye under her pillow. Now she wants to swim the sun's gold path across Lake Chateaugue, up to the Blue Ridges, into the pinking sky. Someday she might just do it. Or she'll pull the sinking sun into her solar plexus. It will rest there each night and each day bloom from her chest.
Mm, mm. I read that, and it was the emotion that came up was sadness, um, a rich loss, a
Mm-hmm.
feeling of loss, and yet there's so much richness around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
this feeling of beauty is so fleeting.
yes,
And you can be so moved by a piece of music and then the music is over and you just want to hang on to it, or a sunset that's gone the next minute. you want to hang on to it. I've had that, most of my life of just wanting to just grasp beauty or a touching moment and never let it go.
And tell me, the first time I read it, I wasn't sure whether you were talking about your mother or about yourself and why you bound the two together like that.
Yeah. So like I said, it sort of was inspired because we both like to take photos of sunsets so much. But also there is this, it's really more about me. When I mentioned Interlochen there, that's a music camp in the northern part of Michigan and so it's more about me, but I just, how you feel like your mother, a lot of people feel like their mother is always part of them. And so I sort of felt like those things could have happened to her too.
I see. I see. That makes a lot of sense.
And and it didn't make total sense, but it just seemed right to do. So I did it. And that's another thing you can do in poetry because it's not really true memoir. You can just use a lot of poetic license, as they say.
And what's funny is when I read your book as a whole, it is a memoir. It
Mhm.
is. And I know a lot about your life
Mhm.
from reading that. What I don't understand is how you were in the soul crushing corporate world for so long. I don't understand how you could do that.
Well, you were too, right?
No, 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 because my corporate world was government and was civil rights.
Mhm.
So, my heart could be
Yeah.
behind the work full time, even
Okay.
when I didn't like the administration or whatever, and
Yeah.
had all of the corporate sort of structures,
Yeah. Yeah.
still could be in love with the mission.
Yeah. So I could say, I could connect something similar, and that is that I was doing a lot of writing and a lot because I was in like the advertising and marketing, a lot of that was, and communication, whether it was with employees or clients.
Yeah.
And so that lent itself. I mean, I was in a creative group. We worked with graphic artists and videographers, and so I was using my creativity. Otherwise, if it had just been all business, 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 I wouldn't have liked that job. So I was doing a lot of writing, and I even thought that I was so lucky to be able to do writing and get paid for it. And then I thought that was soul satisfying enough until I started writing poetry and really getting into it and sharing with people. And then that sort of opened up this whole new world. And it's like, oh, this is the kind of writing that I'm meant to do.
Do you know, it brings back the first time, hang on, I'm turning my heater off. The first time my first year in law school, one of the first courses we had to take was legal writing.
Mhm.
And so I went into it just great. And I did my first piece, I did my research and I wrote it. And the comment that came back from the professor, they don't know who wrote what, they don't have names,
Uh-huh.
said, well, this reads like a really interesting novel,
I love it.
but I'm not sure it's a legal piece. And I thought, oh, I'm not sure I'm in the right place. But I stuck it out. Talk about soul crushing. Law school will do that for you. Yeah, yeah. Wow.
That's a
Uh,
great story.
uh, okay, let me read another one. Let me see. Oh, yeah, this was one of my favorites. And because, well, it told me a lot about you. It told me your other love, which is music, which comes through the poem you read also.
Yeah.
So you have twin loves, or maybe three if you include your private life. Okay. Um, but there was something about this that was so revealing of you, more than the other ones, of who you are and what you value. So I just fell in love with it. So this is called Teaching Mozart in Stone Mountain Prison. Stone Mountain Prison is in Georgia, am I right? Where you live?
Outside of Atlanta.
Okay. I didn't know what crimes they'd committed, those 12 guys glaring at me. No female had taught there before, so I wore a shapeless dress and tortoise glasses. Twice a week, iron gates banged behind me, and an armed guard took me down a warren of halls. He stayed outside my door, but no need. If one prisoner threatened, he'd be jumped by others. Grateful, excuse me, but no need. If one prisoner threatened, he'd be jumped by others, grateful for music appreciation. None knew the classics, but all began to embrace opera, symphony, sonata. I think the music transported them, comforted them, even as they struggled to study in noisy rows of bunks. One evaluation stays with me 30 years later. Thanks be to God for blessing us with this teacher. But I felt blessed early in the semester. We arrived at Mozart Piano Concerto number 21, first movement. I let the record play into the second, saying, "You've got to hear a bit of the Andante." Muted violins conjured the ethereal melody, while repeated notes in the violas mesmerized. The pianist took up the solo for several bars. I reached to lift the needle. 12 students, no longer thief, mugger, murderer, sang out in unison, "No, leave it on." So beautiful.
Thank you. Wow. I haven't read that poem in a long time, and so you kind of brought it back to life, and that was a beautiful reading. Thank you.
You are so
It really
welcome.
touches me to hear you read that and choose it.
The music transforms, as does poetry, as does literature, really, all literature, I suppose. But there's something about music as a toucher of souls. Who would expect it? I mean, what had you go and do that work in the first place?
Well, I have a master's degree in music history, and I'd never really used it. I wanted really sort of to teach in college, but I would have needed a PhD, and I was tired of school at that point. So I'd moved to Atlanta, and I had a government job, and I reached out to somebody somehow. I forget the whole story, sent a resume. And he said, "Well, we don't have any, a college, and well, we don't have any openings in our full time, but we do have this prison program." And I was like, "Really?" uh, and the more I learned about it, this was through Mercer University. The more I thought, well, I'll give it a try. I'll get my foot in the door teaching. And I did teach the next semester on the college campus, one class, but I actually enjoyed the prison experience better because they were more engaged. They were like, rapt. Whereas the students on campus were, they didn't have cell phones in those days, but it was the equivalent of looking at their cell phones.
Right, right. They were taking the easy music course, right? That's what we used to do to fill in our schedules. What looks like I can get an A. It could be. Wow. So talk a little bit about
Exactly.
your speaking or teaching now, current career. Uh-oh, you're
Okay.
frozen.
Well, I don't do it very often, and especially with the pandemic. There weren't very many classes going on. There were a lot of online teaching opportunities, but I wasn't too into that. I did do a few like short online workshops, a couple hours at a time or whatever.
Mhm.
But I have taught at the John C. Campbell Folk School in Brasstown, North Carolina. If anyone's not familiar with that place, it's fabulous. They have writing classes, but they have all kinds of craft classes too. And it's like summer camp for adults, only it's all year long, and you can go a weekend or a week.
Brasstown? Is that what you said? Brasstown?
Yeah, it's near Murphy, North Carolina.
Oh,
It's very close to Blue Ridge.
yeah. I live in
Yeah,
North Carolina, so yeah.
just across the border, near Tennessee. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a great place. And then I've taught at various conferences, like you met me at the Blue Ridge Writers Conference. So, and yeah, just kind of whenever I've had a chance with writing groups, I've taught little workshops, the Georgia Poetry Society. So I'm not really, I'm not trained as a teacher, but I think it's just because I love writing and I love poetry. And so I like to share it. And and help people, especially people like you said, you were sort of just dabbling in poetry, and I really like to sort of
Mhm.
help people understand what poetry is these days. And it isn't
Yes,
those, I mean, it includes those old masters, but it doesn't include, it doesn't have to be poetry that's hard to understand.
right. Do you know the first poem I was ever required to learn in school? I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. Do you know this poem? Yes? Oh, you're frozen. My picture is frozen. I hope this doesn't last. I hope you're going to come back
Yes,
in.
yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, I
I
just got
think
a
our
notice
internet
saying your
connection is a little
internet.
squirrely right now. I don't know if it's
Yes,
mine.
I just got a notice saying your internet connection is unstable. And I was saying, no kidding, surprise. Yeah, sorry about that. So, yeah, that was my first poem that I had to
Yeah.
memorize. Okay. By the way, the last poem I memorized was the preface or introduction or whatever it is to Canterbury Tales, where I memorized it in Old English, like Juan that operated
Oh,
with his surest Zota, the drocht of March hath pierced to the rota. Nice, huh? Oh my.
it sounds great, but that must have been really hard.
Yeah, yeah, it was a requirement in college. Okay, you have one more poem to read for us. Yes?
I thought, yeah, especially because we're coming to an end here, I thought it's always kind of fun to do something humorous. So there's a lot of sad poems in this book. There are poems about my mother dying, for example, but this is a funny poem. Um, my Barbie dated George Harrison. There was just too much competition for Paul. My redheaded Barbie chose George, the unappreciated Beatle. His half shadowed face floated bodiless on the cover of Meet the Beatles. George, shy good looks, narrow jaw, little vampire tooth. Not the huge, sad puppy eyes of Paul, but pretty eyes anyway, eyes looking at you like you were out of sight. And he was kind, innocent, happy just to dance with me. With Barbie. Imaginary George, no, stiff Ken would do. Squealed up in his imaginary baby blue XKE, not the dream car, not on 50 cents an hour babysitting. To catch some rays, she wore the iconic red swimsuit, white sunglasses, heels, always the high heels, unpractical at the beach, yes, but her tiptoed feet couldn't stand anything else. Back at her place, not the dream house, but one I made from wooden blocks, she and George would sit and talk on her shoebox bed. Sometimes they'd make out. He'd stroke her cottony hair, never out of its ponytail. Blue eyeshadow, always perfect. The day George died, the radio played while my guitar gently weeps. I wept too, and I knew Barbie would if the dog hadn't chewed off her head. I keep her body, the shape we girls starve to achieve, in the black vinyl solo in the spotlight light double case, her accessories in the cardboard drawers, her clothes, tatty but beautiful, hang on tiny hangers on tiny racks. True story, I really still do have that Barbie case.
It's
It's full
wonderful,
of
yes.
the clothes because they're so wonderful.
I was always grateful that I'm old enough to have missed the whole Barbie phase of growing up. Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. It's wonderful. I love the way you use words. If I were a better poet or poet critic, I could tell you the what and the why. I just love the way you use words. Um, they always seem to have
Thank you.
more meanings than one. That's the feeling I have about them. So, well,
Well,
yay.
and that is kind of that's a big compliment because poems are supposed to do that. So thank you. That's a compliment.
Good.
But prose writers can learn from poetry too because I love beautiful prose with, metaphor and wonderful descriptions that just get you. So I think prose writers, can benefit from reading some poetry and or taking a poetry class.
I agree. I agree. Well, guess what? I think our time has run. Of course, the only problem is I forgot to check exactly what the time was when we started. So
Oh yeah,
I have
I
no
didn't
idea.
notice.
But I think it is about run. I can't tell you how happy I have been to have you here, and be able to talk to you. I admired you in that class, and way more so since I have read your book of poetry. I still, by the way, held on to you. You read a poem by someone else. You're very generous, um, in the class, which I kept for the year or whatever it's been since that class. I don't know when that even was. Was it just last spring?
April. I think it was
Yeah,
April this year. Yeah.
right. Which a very long poem about standing in line at a bank, which I just laughed, reread it and laughed and laughed. And I thought, well, how now that I've read your book, and I thought how generous it was of Karen to highlight the poetry of others in teaching poetry. So yay for you. Yay. And I hope we see each other at
Thank
another
you.
writing
Thank
group.
you. I'm glad that.
Yeah, for sure. All
Me
right.
too. This has really been fun.
Hold up your book again, please. Hold it up. Hold your book up. Yes, I want everybody to be able to see it, see
Can
the
you see
color
it?
of it. And it might be this was 2018. Yes, it must be time for another one. That's what I say. So
That's that's
that's
my
the old one.
first book.
Yes. But I'm saying it must be time for the next, for the third book. Yes?
Yeah, I'm writing poems all the time, and whether I stick them all into a manuscript, we'll see. That's
All right.
coming. It's coming sometime.
Well, thank you, Karen. I'm really happy that we could do this, and I will no longer be immune to poets. I am wide open, and that hope that we can do more of this, or maybe more of this on another interview with you. That would be fun too. So
Thank you. I enjoyed it, and I was honored that you asked me. So I really appreciate it. It was
thanks. Bye
great
bye.
talking to you. Bye.